Awesome. I think we got a great group for today. For introductions, I'm Stuart Blumenthal. I'm the Intacct Practice Director here at ETHOSystems. And today we're going to be going over something really cool, bank feeds, tips and tricks. And for those who are not familiar with bank feeds, this gives you the ability to integrate your bank with Sage Intacct. And a lot of people ask, why do I do this? And we're going to show you why to do this. There's two primary reasons. One is to help you get your missing transactions from your bank. And these banks are not just for your checking account, but also for your credit card accounts as well. And then the other thing that this is really cool about is it helps you with your reconciliation and your matching and some of the rules that you set up. So anyway, so let's get to it. The presentation is about 30 to 45 minutes. All the phone lines are muted. If anyone has any questions, please let me know. And if you want a copy of this presentation, please just put your email address in there. This presentation will also be up on our YouTube later in the week. And I'm going to spend all the time today in our PowerPoint because there's a lot of information in there that makes it useful. Before we get into it, just two upcoming webinars. Next week, we have our construction payroll tips and tricks. For those who are not familiar, the Sage Intacct payroll module rated by Penta. We are going to be doing some tips and tricks. Penta is going to be doing that presentation with us. And then in October, we're going to be doing a kind of a cool one, talking about WIP reporting, some dashboards and WIP reporting around WIP specifically for our construction clients. We'll probably take about a month break, and then in December we'll have two webinars, one for all the modules except for payroll for year-end processing, and then we'll have a second one for year-end processing only, for payroll processing only. So just FYI from that perspective. So in order to set up Sage, in the setup of the Sage bank feeds, the first thing that you guys need to do is that you need to go into the setup options and turn on Sage Cloud Services. Now, we've all warned you as a client of Ethos, don't turn on the modules by mistake. You can get charged for them. Don't set up users. You'll get charged for them possibly. Here, Sage Cloud Services, what you're going to do is that this is a module that you don't have to worry about getting charged for. You can go in there and set this up. It's pretty easy. You turn it on, hit the configure button, and then it's going to ask you, what are you setting this up for? You'll say bank feeds, and it'll ask you for an email address for who's going to be the administrator of that. So very simple to set that up. And by the way, this module is included up to 199 banks as part of your subscription. So you can connect up to 199 banks. So again, go into company admin, subscriptions, and turn on Sage Cloud Services. By the way, this one does take a little bit of time. So you'll get an email saying you've been activated, but it's not immediate. It does take a couple minutes to, I've seen it take an hour, so just FYI. Once you've turned that on, what you're going to be able to do is go into each of your accounts, into your checking account or into your credit card account within Sage, and there'll be a new tab. So right now, when you go into your checking account, you have details, check printing, bank file. You'll have a new one called Banking Cloud. And what you'll do is you'll hit the little connect button at that point. What it'll do is it'll bring you up into a list of banks at that point. So you can put in your list of banks and see if your bank is listed there. What we have found is that pay close attention to the web address. That's really important. So some banks, their names are similar, but make sure the web address is absolutely correct. And you'll follow the prompts through there. Some banks require tokens, some banks require dual authentication. So it's a process of getting that set up. We have seen issues with cookies, for example, so make sure that that's and dual authentication. So again, make sure you go through that entire process. Also, for those clients that are international, remember to click on the little drop down. By default, it's defaulting to the banks of the United States. So if you're, for example, in Canada, make sure that you look at your Canadian banks up there. One thing that we did find in there is that if you type the word Sage Demo, there's actually a Sage Demo bank out there, which is pretty cool. So if you're wanting to play around with this and not connect your bank, but just especially for implementers out there, it's a great way of playing around with the system instead of messing around with your own bank. So a couple of key aspects. If your bank's not in there, it's not the end of the world. So you can always click on tell us about it. That reports that back up to Sage at that point, and then you can also let us know. But and when you go to that tell us about it, you'll submit a few pieces of information: your account type, the URL, and the bank name. Sage is constantly adding new bank feeds, and again, they're working with most of the major banks. But some of the smaller ones, credit unions, things like that might not be in there. There's a really good website, and I know you can't, but they kind of list out all the different banks. I'll send that to you if you want, but it gives you the status of all the different banks you have out there that Sage has access to or has connections to. Now, there are other ways of creating integrations. That you can actually go through and have a integration created by Sage. That actually does cost money. We can also do it again through like downloads and uploads and stuff like that. But again, for a direct connection, they're limited to those banks. And some banks don't even have the ability to do this. One thing to keep in mind is that there is no national standard out there for banking logins. So, we've seen things like Venmo and Plaid and stuff like that. Those things are not 100% reliable. And those things to keep in mind is that the login of banking software is not uniform. There's no national standard on that. So that does cause some issues. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later. Once you get set up, you want to set the date that you're going to start downloading the transactions. And the one thing that you're trying to avoid is avoiding transactions that you've already reconciled if you're using this for matching, or transactions you've already entered in the system that you want to have it pulled down automatically. So when connecting, always choose the first date of the next month to reconcile. And we always recommend turning this on like 1 or 2 months after you go live. This should not be turned on as part of your go live. And even if you're gone live 2 years ago, there's no harm in that. It's just a matter of turning it on and moving forward with that. One other thing to keep in mind is that most banks will only allow you to download 90 days worth of transactions. Some banks, they'll go back a year possibly. Some banks will go back only 90 days. So again, keep in mind that this is not a national standard aspect like a NACHA file format. So when connecting the banks, as I said, I've already mentioned, there's no national standards. Authorization might be required multiple times. So you might have to go back into that connect screen and reauthorize yourself. So if you're getting errors, first thing to do is try doing that. That's the first thing. Also, we've seen cases where you can get duplicate transactions, like if a check has gone into the system and then it posts later, that could possibly shows up twice. Part of this is using some screen scraping technologies and things like that, and so keep that in mind. And also, there could be a delay of between 3 to 5 days sometimes to pull down transactions. Again, really depends upon the bank. So just want you guys to keep that in mind regarding that. One of the things that we like to do is that if you go into your checking account, create a new view. And if you don't know how to create a view, there's a video on our YouTube channel on how to do that. We can also show you where you can modify the view of the screen. But what this will allow you to do is that you can see, okay, great, what is the bank status, the last bank feed, the next check, things like that. Oops, sorry. What's the next information there? So it makes it a little bit nicer when you update your views to show all the information regarding the connection information. So once you once you establish the connection, if you go into cash management, there's an option called bank transactions. I bet you everyone has gone in there at one time and another gone, hey, why are there no transactions showing in there? I've made transactions. Well, you have, but this screen is specifically for bringing in all bank fee transactions here. And so again, this will help you create, custom views can be very helpful in here. But this is where you can look for things like $0 amounts, things like that. And you can exclude those from the list, stuff like that. So you can ignore specific types of transactions that come into here, or you can also hit stop ignoring. So things like type of transactions you want to ignore, like again, $0 transaction, duplicate transactions, bank fee delays that require you to manually upload a file. So those are things that sometimes you might want to exclude. So like, for example, we're ignoring anything with a charge that's $0 here for our Amex card. So again, those could become like a pre-authorization or a hold or something like that, depending upon how it's interpreted when it's brought down at that point. So once you see those transactions, what you can do is you can go into them. And again, they have no impact on the general ledger because they're just sitting there. They come into the system and they're waiting for you to take action at that point. So, but what you can do is based upon the type of transaction. So this one screen right here that you see, this is for checking account transactions. And what you'll see is that you can, from there, click on the more actions, which we all love that button. If you're not using that button on a lot of screens, make sure you are. And you can say, oh, this is a funds transfer, or interest earned, or I'm going to create a journal entry, other receipts, or receipt payment against that. And it'll launch those screens at that point. If you were to make this, like for example, a credit card transaction, then you'll have different choices of charges, credit card transactions, journal entries, manual payment. So those are your different choices based upon what type of bank you're bringing the bank feed in from at that point. So why you should be using bank transactions is that for transactions that are not already in Intacct, possibly AR transactions that need to be posted, AR transactions that need to be posted to the subledgers, or transactions that don't require purchasing or AP approval process. So again, these are simple ways of bringing in that information into Sage Intacct. And the way that this happens is that you have two choices. You can go through that bank transaction feed, click on each one like we saw, and then say, okay, more actions. Or this is where the power of the product comes in. It's something called create rules, and it's basically called automation rules. And what this will do is that you can have the system do your bank feeds and then do certain processes automatically. And I'm going to take you through that. So what we'll do is take you through the creation rules, and then I'm going to take you through the matching rules. So there's two types of rules you can create using bank feeds. And just before I'm going to make sure there's no questions since I've been going for like 12 minutes. Nope, no questions yet. Okay, so create rules are great for bringing auto creation of journal entries or credit card transaction fees really fast. So what you're going to end up doing is that you're going to go into, there's an area in cash management under setup called rule setup. And what you'll do is you'll come under here, and the first drop down always says, what are you doing? Are you doing a match rule or a creation rule? And if you do a creation rule, what you end up doing is you say, okay, great, this is a, for example, we're going to do it for this based upon our deposit here for Wells Fargo, for example. We're going to set the status to be active, and we're going to filter based upon certain things. And we'll talk about these filtering in a second there. And then what you have down here is you have a little transaction type of I'm going to create a journal entry, and I have a template of that journal entry that I have a template of that journal entry so that it will make that automatic. And we'll go through each part of these a little bit more in detail. So the first thing is that you always have to make sure, is it a debit or credit? And I'm going to give you, I have on the next screen, I think, I have a little cheat sheet, or upcoming, next screen, I have a little cheat sheet that will give you, remember what debits and credits are, because obviously sometimes they're a little bit different from what we think. Whenever you do the word contains in the description, it is case sensitive. So if they're doing all uppercase, it's got to be all uppercase. If it's lowercase, it's got to be lower. It's case sensitive, and that's a major aspect. So if the bank changes all of a sudden, your bank rules are not working, that's the first thing I would look at. And then always add a date filter when you start using the rules. So for example, you're setting these up for the first time. We don't want to bring any old transactions into the system. I mean, we don't want it to auto create anything. So again, make sure that you put a start date to get started, or again, you can go back 90 days, or based upon your bank, it could go back way further. I again prefer to get that started at a specific date. So this is important. So banks, for example, when they do withdrawals, they're doing debits, that decreases your balance, things like that. Banks, when they do credits, they increase your balance. And then credits decrease your balance, and credit cards, debits increase your balance. So man, if you can remember this, you can hopefully figure these things out, and it makes it this helps out a lot. As I said, once you set up what you're looking for, you then tell it to make the journal entry at that point. So you're going to come in and go to your predefined journal creations. And what you'll do under here is that this is where you put in the offset account number, the offset. So for example, when this comes in, we're going to hit our account, or hit our department, hit our location, yada yada at that point. So this does the offset for entry for you. It knows the other side based upon the actual bank account. A couple things when you're setting up the transaction journal type, the posting status is pretty important, the posting state. If you put in draft, that will then show up in the general ledger, and it will require you to then post it manually. Otherwise, if you say post, it's gonna then look at your approval process and then post it to the general ledger automatically. So again, some people, I'm one of those, you can bring all these entries in, have it create the rules, and then you have to review those journal entries through a draft status, or again, you can have it post automatically. Honestly, I like to put mine in draft, especially early on in the process, to make sure that there's no issues. For your credit card transactions, the primary GL account is determined by the credit card setup. Because credit card transactions are handled differently, there's no approval process available, and will be available in the credit card reconciliation and auto matched. So just keep that in mind, that the credit card aspect for transaction, when you bring in a credit card transaction automatically versus a bank transaction, are two different things, or two handled very differently from that aspect. So as I said, the creation rules are great for bringing in transactions that you want to have brought in from your bank, brought down into Sage Intacct, and you want to then have it automated at that point of creating the transactions within Sage based upon the rules you set up. If you don't set up the rules again, you have to go in and do the more actions manually at that point. Now, the other part of using bank feeds is for matching, so helping you with your bank rec. So again, as we went into a couple of uses here, but when you go into your rule setup, when you change the transaction type from a create rule to a match rule, this is where you come in here, and then you have the ability to filter, and then it's going to pull down the information. Now, we do always have a few challenges here. And these are kind of like the best practices. May always look for, they call them like sniper rules, or like very specific rules. Create those rules first. So like, for example, like, hey, when my payroll is this, then make a matching rule for my payroll. Or when I'm doing my credit card deposits, do that one. Make them specific, because then you're going to look for specific types of transactions. So those should go first, and then you can get to more general rules. But you'll see that, you might, if you have, you want to make sure that you're not making them too general. You don't want to make them too general. Again, try making them based upon the specific type of transaction. So, and while you're making these, and I'm going to give you some examples in a moment, one other thing to keep in mind is that the way things hit the bank are very different from our accounting system. And everyone's like, yeah, for example, like payroll, for example, that might go in as a lump sum over there, but within the Sage Intacct, it's itemized out. So for example, if you say group by Intacct transaction makes many Intacct transactions into a lump sum at the bank. So that's one way. Or if you do the group by bank transaction, that says many bank transactions are lumped together in Intacct. So again, if you're doing like a cash receipt where it's gone in on a specific day, it's going to try grouping it together based upon maybe a date or based upon what we're grouping these together on. So again, some people's deposits go in as a lump sum, and then when they hit the general ledger or the cash rec, it's itemized out. So again, this helps you from that grouping aspect there. So just to give you an example here, this is for vendor employment payments. So one of the issues that you run into is that unless you're doing ACH or your employees are running to the bank that day, the check date that's in the system will not match the date at the bank. It's going to be delayed multiple days. And so as a result, you're not going to want to, when you're doing vendor employees, you're not going to want to match. You're going to filter based upon debits, but you're going to match only usually by the amount and the document number, the check number and the amount. Those are the only two things you'll hit on those specific ones, because again, the date's not going to match up at that point. An example of of a customer deposit. Again, you're controlling the deposit date because you're putting in the system, and then you're putting it in the system, and then usually taking it to the bank or doing a electronic deposit or something along those lines. So when you filter by credit, usually you try to match based upon the date and the amount, not the document number, because usually those document numbers don't reference what the bank document number is with your document number for deposits. So keep that in mind. So again, when you're creating these matching rules, the debits and the credits there. So you're like, okay, Stuart, you just created all these rules here. How do I know what works and what doesn't work at this point here for my matching? So one of the nice features here in the system, and it's right off the menus, is you can see your rule performance. And so what you're going to be looking for is that what percentage of your stuff gets matched up at that point. So you can say, okay, great, based upon this rule set here, how many bank transactions were processed, and what was your matching at that point. So the higher the percentage, the more you could tweak it. And so again, look for, again, having more specific rules is how we have solved that problem here. It's not uncommon for our clients to have, 10, 20, 30 rules to match up for their bank. And it does take, a little bit of a science behind that, but keep that in mind. One of the things that we recommend is that, you kind of go into the system and you go, hey, I want to set up matching, or I want to set up the auto creation rules, and then you find out a lot of them don't work. And what I will say is that the best thing to do in this case here is to come up with a plan. So for example, credit cards, charges that don't require approval, create a rule. Bank feeds. And so you go through each one of these different types of transactions, and you determine how are you going to handle each one of these there. So I think it's, are these being created automatically, or do you need to, are they going to be entered in the system? And again, how are you matching them at that point there? So these are things that you have to think about, and coming up with each one of your different transactions that are hitting the bank, and how do you want those to get matched up or not. So that helps if you have that rule set, or you have that that flow chart ahead of time. Then when you're creating this through the system, it really does help out significantly. So I rattled off very quickly. It was 30 slides, and I didn't realize I went in 27 minutes. Do we have any questions from the team here? Does anyone have any questions regarding the setting up the bank rules, or the bank feeds? Again, I'll state this. You have bank feeds as part of your system. It's up to 199 banks. Once you hit 200 banks, there's a charge for additional banks at that point. Best rules of practice: start right after you go, start a month or two after you go live. Get your first couple bank recs done, because your first bank rec, again, you're kind of replicating from your prior system anyway. So get your first bank rec from your prior system into Intacct. Do your first month or two at that point, and then move forward, and then feel free to start setting up some of that automation. If you're using a small bank, talk to us. We might be able to help you out. Again, if you're using a big bank, the biggest issue we run into sometimes is just having to redo the authentication. Once that's set up, it really can help automate your month-end process, your reconciliation process. And if you have a lot of banks, this is a great way of bringing all that information down at one time. Or if you have one bank with a lot of different accounts, it makes it really helpful. So with that, that was really for today's goal, to go over this. Everyone has been very quiet today. I've had a few of you put your email addresses in. I will send off this PowerPoint as soon as this meeting's done. And I want to wish everyone a great day, and hope all's doing well. Thank you very much for your time.